Good afternoon. Good afternoon, friends and newcomers. Welcome to the South Orange Library's Fall Lecture Series, Special Conversations with Special People. I'm Phyllis Kalb, and I'm so happy today to have as our guest speaker, Roger Foster. Roger is a professor of philosophy at City University of New York. He first spoke here on April 16, 2015, on the topic Economic Democracy, Cure for Capitalism. Then on March 16, 2016, Roger spoke on the topic Financialization, the consequences of living in a society dominated by financial institutions. How well we know that. And last year, on September 11th, 2020, Roger spoke on the topic Civil Disobedience, but in this case, not in our meeting room with coffee and cookies as we had in the past, but on Zoom. Roger writes very timely themes, and today's topic will be how Stoicism can change your life. And in these troubled times, we really have to be stoic. But before we begin, I can't wait to tell everyone that I will be retiring after 35 years, or being promoted. Haven't decided which word I better. In any case, in these troubled times, I'm so happy that I have a wonderful person who I'm passing the torch to. My very talented friend, Laura Sims, who is an author, an acclaimed author. And her book, Looker, is fabulous, poet and reference librarian here at the library. I know she will bring new, fascinating, and informative speakers to continue our lecture series. Welcome, Laura. I'm so excited that you'll be doing it.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. It's such an honor to follow in your footsteps. I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
You know what? You're going to march to a different place, and you're much younger, and you have a lot to say and a lot to offer, and we're so grateful that you will do it.
Oh,
so thank you,
Phyllis. Thank you.
I mean it. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our very special guest, Roger Foster.
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction. And I just want to wish you this is a well-deserved retirement, Phyllis, and I want to wish you the best. I'm sure you'll find loads of things to keep yourself busy and everything. So I've enjoyed working with you the last few years.
It's been a pleasure with you too, Roger.
Awesome. It's great. I'm happy for you. Yeah, let me think about how to get this across. So we're going to talk about Stoicism today, and the topic how Stoicism can change your life, which is a play on Alain de Botton's How Proust Can Change Your Life, which is a famous book, maybe 20, 30 years ago now. So I really came to Stoicism quite late in my philosophical career. And it's only the last few years when I've really got sort of serious about looking into it and taking it more seriously as a philosophy, as a part of the tradition. And it tends to be something that's kind of set to one side, and you'll talk about it in philosophy class, and if you go to college and do philosophy and things like that, but it's a different sort of philosophy. It's a different sort of approach to philosophy, I think, than the philosophies that we usually come across in the classroom. And it has something. It has an approach towards philosophy that it's not really an academic exercise. It's mostly a kind of practice of self-discipline and self-healing, is a big part of it, and I think that makes it different from a lot of philosophy, a lot of ways of thinking about philosophy. And as I've sort of been thinking about mental health the last few years, I've realized how Stoicism, how important it is in that context, and what a contribution it can really make to mental health, well-being, and flourishing. So I'd like to talk about that and share some of those some of those ideas and insights that I think are quite powerful and quite really useful to know and even to use and to sort of incorporate into our daily lives. So, and that's one thing I really like about Stoicism, that it's not a excuse me, it's not a sort of a dry academic theory. It's an approach to life that has a very it has a very sort of concrete and practical orientation. So so we will we'll have a look at those things. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. So the Stoics, as many of you will know already, I'm sure, was an ancient philosophical school during what's called the Hellenistic period. So, during after the conquests of Alexander the Great, after the well-known philosophies of Plato and Aristotle had sort of published, had their schools, and they died, and their sort of traditions have been taken on by other people, and Stoicism emerged in this period about 300 BCE until 2 AD, but about 200 AD is sort of the usual way of thinking of it. So it runs for about 450 years, and there's a number of famous thinkers that are associated with the tradition. It's called, the Stoa is literally a porch. It's kind of a front step. And it's the name given to the Stoics because Zeno, the founder, used to teach on this front step of a building in the marketplace in Athens. And so he used to sort of teach right out there on the porch, and so the school came to be called the Stoics. Other notable Stoic philosophers besides Zeno, Cleanthes was his pupil, Chrysippus. And it also became popular in the Roman Empire. And in fact, a lot of the writings that we have of Stoicism come from the writings of the Romans, Seneca and Cicero in particular. And there's some later works that were sort of written by Roman or Latin-speaking Christians as well. So, one of the big tragedies is that none of the works of the Greek Stoics actually survived. So unlike the works of Plato, a lot of his works survived. Aristotle, a lot of his works were actually found in a basement in North Africa, so they survived. But the Stoics, we have nothing directly from any of these people: Zeno, Chrysippus, Cleanthes, or if we have something from Epictetus, but he's Roman, he's a little later. So it's one of the big tragedies that none of these works survived. So all we have are really fragments, and it's, people sometimes ask, well, why didn't these works survive? And the simplest answer, the best answer I've heard is that history is written by the winners, and history was written by eventually it was written by the Christian community who, when the Roman world turned Christian, and of course they were interested in Plato, they were somewhat interested in Aristotle later on, but they weren't interested in the Stoics. So that's sort of the big reason why Stoicism didn't really survive. The works didn't survive. So a lot of the writing on Stoicism is kind of reconstructing, and there's always work of trying to reconstruct and make sense of what's missing. So there's a lot of detective work and a lot of sort of creative thinking involved in trying to work out what the debates were that the Stoics would have been having in the 3rd century BCE, and why they were so obsessed with these debates. So it's not a sorry, let me. There we go. Okay. So it's not like academic philosophy today. It was a fully fledged theory of the art of living, a sort of techne, from which we get the word technique, as a kind of theory or more a practice. Beyond is where we get biology, the word for life, a technology of life almost. So with a way of thinking about living. And there's a quote from Epictetus's Discourse, which I think sets this up and really expresses this very nicely. So I've just got to get out of the sorry, I just got to get out of the full screen so I can read this. Can everybody still see the?
Yes,
we can see. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so this is from Epictetus. He says, "For even sheep do not vomit up their grass and show to the shepherds how much they have eaten, but when they have internally digested the pasture, they produce externally wool and milk. Do you also show not your theorems to the uninstructed, but show the acts which come from their digestion," right? So it's not about, what we do in the classroom is sort of mostly that, right? Vomiting up the grass. You sort of, you describe a theory, you talk about it, you try to get it across, and students have learned it. When they can vomit up the theory, they can tell you, well, yeah, this starts here and there are these parts and they work like this. So Epictetus here is saying that's not the point of learning, that's not the point of instruction. And he says, so what a sheep do, they don't vomit it up, they digest, and then they produce the fruits. The fruits are the wool and the milk, right? So Stoicism wants to see itself sees itself like that when we're learning something, it's not about memorizing and regurgitating it, but we're actually digesting it and we're incorporating it into the way we live. So that's the big difference. That for Stoicism, that's the importance of learning, the importance of theory is to live better, to be able to digest these ideas and produce our own sort of flourished way of living with the things that we've learned. There's a very quite well-known theory of Stoicism that comes from a French philosopher called Pierre Hadot, and he calls it, he refers to Stoicism as a sort of form of spiritual exercise. And in fact, he takes this to be characteristic of a lot of philosophy in the ancient world, which I also think is true. And you can look at Buddhist philosophy like this as well. Eastern philosophy has a lot of this characteristic as well. Western philosophy, after the ancient world sort of loses this aspect to it, I think. So a spiritual exercise is an exercise for the soul. There's always this comparison here with physical exercise. We exercise our bodies in order to make them more stronger and disciplined, in order to sort of make them able to do what we need them to do. And so a spiritual exercise is something we do for the soul. That's the same as the exercises we do for the body. So Stoicism likes to look at itself as it's a kind of exercise for the soul, just like physical exercise and exercise for the body. And you find a lot of these, use of the metaphor in ancient philosophy, that philosophers are really like doctors of the soul, just as a doctor treats sick people. If you have a soul that's not healthy, you need philosophy in order to really sort of work on that and cure those problems. And of course, today, as I'll talk about a little later, a lot of that aspect of philosophy has now been taken over by psychology. Psychology does a lot of the things that really encompass this idea of sort of training and sort of making the soul healthy, and sort of exercise to make the soul healthy. A lot of that's in psychology. Okay, so Stoicism is usually taken to be a eudaimonistic. The word here is, the root word here is eudaimonia, which is a word that comes from Aristotle, and it means happiness. So it's a eudaimonistic ethical system in the Socratic tradition. So it follows on from Socrates, who was Plato's teacher as well. So I guess you could ask, well, if it means happiness, why don't we just write happiness and not eudaimonistic? Well, because it doesn't exactly mean happiness. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated, because eudaimonia for Aristotle and for the Stoics means something more like flourishing, right? So it's not a one-time feeling, or it's not really a feeling at all as such. It's not about we often use happiness as a sort of momentary feeling of elation, right? Suddenly we're happy and we don't know why. Maybe we sort of ingested something and suddenly, whoa, I'm really happy. So that's not what eudaimonia is, right? Eudaimonia is I think a nice way to describe it is it's the sense of satisfaction you get from knowing you are living a life that's well lived, or knowing that you are flourishing. It's the sense of satisfaction, the sense of well-being that accompanies a life that is lived in a flourishing way. So it's a big thing. It refers to life as a whole. It's not sort of a small. It's not referring to moments. It's not just about how we feel. It's a judgment about life as a whole. And Stoicism, so at this time there were a number of, so philosophy is made up at this time of a number of different schools in the ancient Greek world in the Hellenistic period. Cynicism is one of those. The Cynics were sort of very popular as well. Epicureanism, which is focused on pleasure, but largely about avoiding pain. Platonism, which was important for the birth of Christianity, and it has a very sort of elaborate view of the soul and the independence of the soul. And Aristotelianism, which was the peripatetic tradition, which also had this idea of eudaimonia alongside Stoicism. So in the Hellenistic world, philosophy took place in these sort of in these different schools. And if you wanted to do philosophy, to be a philosopher, you would join one of these schools and sort of put yourself under the authority of one of the teachers and sort of learn the axioms, or the sort of ideas and the values, and sort of try to embody that way of living. So eudaimonia, as I was saying, it's based, or it sort of refers to the idea of the good life. The end, or the telos of human existence, is happiness, and it comes from these two words, eu, which is the prefix meaning good, and daimon, which means spirit. So having a good spirit, or sort of in more sort of general language, flourishing, or blessedness, as a sort of judgment made on the course of life as a whole. So Aristotle thought of the sort of happy life, the eudaimon life, as a life that was well ordered, encompassing a number of different activities that are done well, whether it's sort of intellectual activity, thinking is one, being an athlete is another one, being a soldier is another one, in the ancient world. So there's a number of sort of different ways of living a well-ordered life. Often, a life will have a number of components to it. Epicureanism, they focused on this idea of ataraxia, which is sort of happiness, but it's really freedom from distress and worry, and it's more like an idea of tranquility. In troubling times, you sort of reach this idea of freedom from distress. You can still live a life of tranquility. And in Stoicism sort of takes on this idea as well, but it joins it to this idea of apatheia. And that word comes from the idea of pathos, which is the Greek word for suffering. In fact, we still use that word pathos, right? People still say that. And the word pathetic comes from pathos. It's just about what we feel, what we what our emotions are, what we're feeling. So apatheia, so it's a life without pathos, or a life without suffering or without passion. And of course, here we get to the stereotype of the Stoics, right? That everybody knows this stereotype, right? The Stoics are these people who are just completely dispassionate. They don't feel any emotion. They sort of walk around and sort of don't, somebody sort of, bops them on the head and they don't feel anything. They never respond. They're completely unfeeling. And I gotta say, this is a bad rap for the Stoics. They don't deserve that. It's not fair to say that they disregard emotion, or that they're unemotional. As we'll see, the word pathos is used in a way that specifically targets very, very strong and harmful emotion. So it's not saying that we should live without emotion. It's specifically targeting forms of harmful, excessive passion, right? And so there's no implication that we're to sort of be unemotional, or that we're not to feel the right emotions, or that we shouldn't feel sort of love and joy when those things are appropriate, right? That doesn't follow from what the Stoics are saying, as we'll see. So I talked a little bit about the main figures, but just to sort of recap, so Zeno was the founder of the school. Cleanthes was his disciple, but we don't have a lot from Cleanthes. Chrysippus, who's alleged to have written 700 plus works, again, none of which have survived. And then there are two Roman Stoics here, Marcus Aurelius, who writes what we call the Meditations. And the Meditations are a classic work of Stoic writing, because they're not written as a thesis, right? You're not supposed to read them as you read an essay. The Meditations are a set of, Marcus is not writing for anybody else. He's writing for himself, and he's writing down reminders that are going to help him live according to the principles that he thinks are the right ones. So writing the book he's doing that thing that Epictetus, who's here as well on the bottom right, he's doing that thing that Epictetus talked about. He's trying to digest the ideas, right? And digesting the ideas is putting them into practice in your life. And in order to do that, he's doing this writing. It's more like journaling. It's more like writing a diary entry that he's doing to sort of discipline himself, to keep a check on himself, and to motivate himself to live according to these principles. So it's very unlike other writings or the works of philosophy. I don't think there's anything like it really in the tradition. It's a very unique work. Okay, so I'll come back to Marcus Aurelius a little later. But so the Stoics, to get to the Stoics' views about ethics and how to live, according to missed a slide. According to the Stoics, the most important thing is to act with virtue, to act according to virtue, to do the right thing, right? To do the thing that is good, to do the ethical thing, to do the right thing. That's the only thing that matters, right? Is doing the right thing for the Stoics. So everything everything else that we might consider good, things like fame, wealth, power, beauty, life, pleasure, etc., they don't count. They go into the list of what are called indifference, right? Indifference are things that don't determine whether we're living well, don't determine whether we're happy or whether we have eudaimonia, but they're useful tools that help us to be virtuous, right? They're often useful things, but they don't determine whether we are living well and whether we're flourishing. Only whether we are acting according to virtue is going to determine whether we are flourishing. Virtue actually, interestingly, I think means something close to excellence. That's why I left in the word arete there, which is the translation of virtue, and it actually means excellence. It doesn't mean it's not moral or sort of obligation or anything like that. And again, it's just an indicator that for the Stoics, this is all about flourishing and living well, right? This is not about sort of defeating ourselves and crushing ourselves. This is about flourishing and living well, and this is supposed to be the route to achieve that end. So if we sort of take it from the other side, what is evil? Again, only vice, only the opposite of virtue, only not acting virtuously, but acting viciously is the only thing that is evil, the only thing that can keep us from eudaimonia, is viciousness rather than vice. Everything else, notoriety, poverty, weakness, ugliness, death, pain, etc., excuse me, none of those things are able to dislodge us from happiness. None of those things dislodge us from eudaimonia. That's a very strong claim, isn't it? When we think about it. So it's definitely a it's a transformation of how we think and what we value that we'd have to sort of get to see where the Stoics are coming from on this. But a lot of this is also about how we relate to these things, about how we think about death. Even sort of we treat pain with medicine and things, but there's also you could also sort of treat pain with therapeutic ideas, and there are sort of psychological approaches to pain as well. Some of those tie in with Stoicism, but I mean, pain's a hard one because it's so immediate and everything. The things about sort of material possessions, other sort of traditions have said that as well, and that's definitely, Stoicism's definitely agrees with that we don't need material possessions to be happy, right? We don't need anything like that for happiness. We don't need fame. We don't need other people to like us, right? We just need to know that we are flourishing and doing the right thing. So everything else other than virtue or vice, everything else is indifferent. Okay, that goes into the category of indifferent, whether preferred or rejected or appropriate or inappropriate. It cannot affect true eudaimonia or happiness. So whether we have fame or notoriety, wealth or poverty, it doesn't affect our happiness according to the Stoics, right? Those things are indifferent. The only thing that matters is how are we living, right? Are we in terms of our action, right? How are we living in terms of our action? Are we acting according to virtue? Are we doing the right thing? And if that's true, then we're capable of reaching happiness. Okay. Now, the first thing I'd say, so having sort of put all that out there, and sort of, I'm sure everybody's thinking, well, that's bizarre because we know all these things do affect our happiness, and all those things do seem to affect our well-being, right? And part of what the Stoics want us to see is that that's an illusion, to think that those things really affect our well-being, that effectively is not true, and we're sometimes sort of we're deluded. We're sort of deluded into thinking that these things are important, that they affect us, when in fact they don't. The first thing to say, I think, is about this idea of eukaryosis. Let me explain that. The principal desire of all animals is to preserve themselves, to reject what's harmful, and to pursue what benefits us. We seek to persevere according to nature, say the Stoics, appropriating what is beneficial to us. So the word eukaryosis is usually translated as appropriation, which I know is another sort of weird and cumbersome word, but it's translated as appropriation. So what we're doing when we're living is, the process of living is sort of appropriating things, right? So, here I am in my office, I'm here drinking my tea, and I'm very thirsty, so I'm sort of going to take a drink of tea. I'm appropriating the tea, right? The tea is good for me. It helps me to preserve myself. It takes away my thirst. It's helpful to my constitution. So I'm appropriating it. So that the sense of this is, I'm sort of, when we appropriate things, when we live, we're sort of taking things into the realm of what preserves us. We're taking things into the realm of what is good for us. And so life is about acquiring things through this process of eukaryosis, right? We sort of, we acquire things that are good for us. Practically we acquire things, might acquire a bicycle that we could, take rides on. We acquire ways of doing things, ways of getting about. We acquire mental talents and knowledge that we can use. So we seek to preserve ourselves by appropriating, by sort of, in doing that, we're sort of extending the realm of what's good for us, extending the realm of our power effectively, and preserving ourselves. Now, this is really important for the Stoics, and this is where the idea that only virtue is good for us comes from, right? Since we humans are rational beings, we seek to preserve our own constitution as rational beings, okay? And that's really why virtue is the only true good, because only virtue preserves and satisfies our rational nature, right? So unlike animals, unlike other things in the universe, human beings have a rational constitution. We are rational beings. We act, we do things according to reasons. We believe things according to reasons. We live according to reasons. They may be sometimes bad reasons, right? They are often bad reasons, aren't they? We all get fooled. We all get fooled by motivated reasoning, right? But that it doesn't say we're always right and perfectly rational, but it just says that we act according to reasons, right? We have reasons or grounds for the things that we do, and that makes us rational, right? So eukaryosis for us, appropriation is going to be about preserving our constitution by acting in a rational way, by appropriating things that sort of serve and feed our rational nature and that allow us to express ourselves as rational beings, and ultimately only caring about good, only caring about doing good and doing good things. For the Stoics is what will secure our rational nature. Getting obsessed or getting sort of deluded into thinking indifference, things like wealth and fame are good for us, will lead us astray, because those things do not serve our rational nature, right? They do not speak to who we are as rational beings who have a need to live in a rational, reason-based way. They serve parts of our nature that aren't, that don't really represent the best of who we are, right? So this is why they're not things that are good for us, or things that allow us to reach eudaimonia. By the way, I mean, the Stoics will definitely say, if all else equal, if it's, if you have a choice of living in material comfort or living in sort of penury, choose material comfort, right? Choose the thing that makes you comfortable, right? So preferred indifference, things like sort of material comfort, wealth, fame, sure, have those things, that providing you don't have to sacrifice any part of your rational nature, right? Providing you don't have to sacrifice your eudaimonia and well-being in order to have them. But the minute that it becomes a contest or a sort of conflict between your well-being, your eudaimonia, and those sort of indifference, you have to give up the indifference. Okay. Okay, Stoic assumptions. I take my tea. All right, so the three, if you went to a Stoic school, if you went to study with the Stoics in the ancient world, you would learn these three subject areas, I guess, these three areas of thought. Physics, which is about the universe as a whole, the logic of the universe as a whole. And for the Stoics, the universe as a whole is a single ordered cosmos. It's a single ordered system, right? Meaning that it's a deterministic system. There's no, so any idea of a sort of an outside being, whether it's God or somebody coming in and changing things, making decisions and changing the way the universe works, the Stoics don't agree with that. They don't go for that. They say, no, the universe is a perfectly determined material system, and it's a rational system, right? Things happen for reasons. Things happen for causes, right? Everything happens because it's caused to happen by something else. So the universe has this rationality to it that we can kind of see and resonate with, because, hey, we're rational too. We can see that, right? Logic is about our language and our minds, right? Our language and our minds, and how we understand the things that are conveyed to us in sense impressions, things that we can sense, right? What our senses tell us. All knowledge is based on sense impressions. The Stoics call these fantasia, which is the ancient word for sort of an impression, where we get the word fantasy from as well. It's like when you look at something and it's imprinted on your mind. That's an impression or a fantasia, right? When you're looking at, you know, a screen or a cup, and that impression is printed on your mind, you know, you can still have it there. When you look away, you can still remember it. That's sort of the domain of logic, and trying to discipline and understand our sense impressions is what logic is all about. Ethics, which is usually considered the most important part, is where we express ourselves and act as rational social animals. A moral character grows with our reason as we become more rational. We're able to grow and appropriate more things. That word eukaryosis again. So we're sort of these rational creatures, and we're very social. So it's not, you know, I think another part of the bad rap the Stoics get is that, you know, they're very sort of isolated and individuals, and they don't sort of care about the social. Again, that's not true of the ancient Stoics, the ancient Greek Stoics. And again, if you read Marcus Aurelius, you'll see this is very, very strongly emphasized by him, that action is about doing things for the human community, right? So rational action is about helping people to live well, right? It's about doing things that help the human community around you, helping other people to live well, helping other people to live according to virtue. So there's a strong sort of social communal element to what the Stoics want and to what they're saying. It's not this sort of purely isolated sort of individual philosophy at all. It's a very social and communal philosophy. Sorry, a couple of words there at the top, which mean things within our power and things which are beyond our power. So this is really important for the Stoics, this idea that the only things within our power, right? The only things within our power are opinion, aim, desire, aversion, and whatever affairs are our own. What is up to us, right? In other words, things we can control. The only things within our power are things we can control, right? We can't affect what happens when we give our opinion. All we can do is have an opinion, right? We can't determine that other people are going to believe us. We can't make it so that they're going to think we're right. We can't make it so that they're going to like us. All we can do is have an opinion, have an aim, and do whatever we're going to do. But other things we can't control. So things beyond our power are our body, right? That decays and we have nothing to do with it, not in our power. Property, reputation, office, and whatever are not our own affairs. So external things, the universe, whatever happens in the universe is things that we can't control, right? So what we are to focus on for the Stoics when we're thinking about action, what we should focus on are things that are up to us, things that are within our power to do. So I'm not saying we should only restrict ourselves to sort of, you know, helping where we can help. I'm saying that in terms of action, right, we can't be we don't make a decision to do things or not do things based on sort of how likely they are, or whether other people, whether they're going to make a difference, but we do things that are the right thing. That's what we can affect, and we can't sort of have an influence on what happens once that's gone into the world. We can't sort of affect how other people are going to understand that, and so on. So this is from Epictetus again. The things within our power are by nature free, unrestricted, and unhindered, but those beyond our power are weak, dependent, and restricted, and alien. If you attribute freedom to things by nature dependent, you will be hindered, you will lament, you will be disturbed, you will find fault both with gods and men. So this is for the Stoics. This is where human unhappiness and misery comes from, right? A large part, perhaps the large part of human misery comes from the fact that we don't realize that those things that we're lamenting are not up to us, right? They don't count on us. We can't affect them. They're not within our power, right? Our task is to restrict ourselves to things that are within our power, things we can do, right? And to do those things and to worry about those things. Excuse me, but we can't be concerning ourselves or worrying ourselves or getting emotional about things that are beyond our power. Again, from Epictetus, but if you take for your own only that which is your own and view what belongs to others just as it really is, then no one will ever compel you, no one will restrict you, you will find fault with no one, you will accuse no one, you will do nothing against your will, right? So it's like this idea of the kind of the inner citadel, this idea that we're sort of secure in this sphere where we can't be, where nobody can force us, where we can't be harmed, where nobody can compel us, where we can come to our own decisions and take our own actions. And that's all the sphere of what is within our control, right? Which is our beliefs, our thoughts, and our decisions to take action, right? All of that is within our control. So, all right. So a lot of the kind of, let's talk about the emotions now, or the passions. A lot of what the Stoics are doing is about controlling our emotional reactions, or learning to be emotional about the right things, and learning to avoid being emotional about things that we can't control, about things that don't depend on us, right? So there's a lot of sort of Stoic training is about sort of training emotions, or learning to have the right emotional reactions to things, and learning to discipline our emotions so that we're not making ourselves what the Stoics would call making ourselves unwell by having emotions about things that aren't helpful for us, that don't depend on us, that don't really mean anything to us. So it's about the object of passion and how we feel, the sort of feeling of the passion as well, that are both important. Okay, so from the Greek pathe, pathos, the passions. So what are they not? Okay, so I'm sort of saying this because, as I said before, it's not, we don't want to sort of buy into that bad rap of the Stoics that they're unemotional, that they don't believe in sort of having emotions. That's not true, right? So when we talk about the passions and we talk about these sort of bad emotions that the Stoics sort of want to reduce or eliminate and discipline, so these are the things that we're not talking about. We're not talking about sensations, of immediate sensations of pleasure and pain. We're not talking about what are called pre-emotions, right? Propathia, things, eros and other sort of emotions we have that are not quite emotions, but we sort of feel them before we act. It's sort of a prelude to something, right? It's more like a mood, right? A lot of the time we have a mood that's not really, it's not urgent. It's not telling us to do something. It's not saying, well, you really got to act on this now, but it's sort of, it's coloring things, right? It's leading us somewhere, but it's not urgent. That's kind of like these pre-emotions. They're things we feel, but they don't necessitate us to action necessarily, and certainly not immediately. There are also things that the Stoics call eupathia, which are good emotions, right? Good feelings. Things like joy, right? It's good to feel joy. Caution, it's often, very helpful to feel a sense of caution. And wish, to sort of wish for things, to be excited about things that we want that are in the future. That's all positive, right? We're excited about things that we're going to do, excited about things that we're going to achieve, excited about goals that we have. All those things are very positive, and the Stoics are not saying, right, don't feel these emotions, right? It's perfectly fine to have good emotional feelings, positive emotions. So these are not the passions. So passions are essentially, for the Stoics, false judgments, right? That's really important, that the passions, there's this link between the passions and judgments or beliefs, right? And that's something I'll talk about that in a little while. I'm not going to go on too much longer. I know we're at 150 or almost 150 already, but I just want to make that connection with psychology. A lot of recent work in psychology, rational behavior therapy, or what's called these days cognitive behavior therapy. A lot of that comes from the Stoics, and it comes from the Stoics' views about the passions. And in particular, the view that psychology takes up, that comes from the Stoics, this idea that passions are false judgments, they're false ways of judging things. So they're beliefs that we get wrong, okay? And there are four forms that there are two sort of present forms and two future forms. So delight is a kind of exaggerated form of pleasure in the present, but it's more excessive, and it's sort of, it overtakes us, it leads us astray. Distress is a kind of the counterpart of fear, but it's in the present, right? It's sort of this bad feeling that something bad is here. Delight is the feeling that something good that we must have is here. Distress is the feeling that something bad that we must avoid is here. Lust is the future, something good in the future that we must have. Gives us a sense of lust. And the fear that there is something that will meet us in the future that is very bad, right? That gives us the sense of fear. So these four judgments about something good here now, something bad here now, and then the future, these are the passions, right? And they are what the Stoics call these false judgments about things. All right, so we've got the two current forms, delight, as I mentioned, and distress, a present good, the presence of an apparent present good, and the disorder of an apparent present evil. And lust, a prospective good, so a good in the future, and fear, something evil in the future. Okay, so the passions are replaced by good states, right? So this is according to the Stoics, how a sort of healthy life is lived. Instead of delight, we feel a sense of joy in the present. Instead of lust, this sort of overpowering state of lust, we feel a sense of wish. There's no sort of counterpart to distress, because that would be sort of something bad in the present. The only thing bad in the present would be doing something immoral, doing something bad, and that would be, that's the only bad thing we can do. So caution instead of fear in the future. Again, it's sort of, you can see that what's the sort of logic of this is that it's replacing a kind of an emotion based on a kind of a very sort of a very strong belief in something good or evil, and it's replacing that emotion with a sort of slightly lower grade emotion that's able to sort of that's not so absolute, right? It's not so all or nothing. And so instead of sort of having an all or nothing feeling, we have this sort of enabling feeling instead. So here's how let me sort of plug this into the three disciplines of Epictetus. And these relate to the sort of physics, logic, and ethics. So here we've got desire, which is what we're talking about here, the discipline of desire, and then the discipline of judgment, and then the discipline of action. So all of these, the point of disciplining the emotions, doing all this discipline, is to sort of appropriate this, to take on this sort of Stoic idea of eudaimonia. So the discipline of desire, we're learning to see ourselves as sort of part of the universe, right? We're not single isolated atoms, but single elements within a larger kind of physical system. The discipline of judgment, we're uncovering implicit value judgments in our language, in our sort of beliefs. We learn only to give assent only to those impressions that are adequate, that are catalepticae, as the Stoics say, right? So what happens when we have an emotion and we have this intense passion is that we're judging something that's not there, right? We judge it, we're giving assent to something which is not an adequate sort of judgment of what's there, right? And often this goes to, remember, the indifference, right? So we'll make a judgment that we absolutely must have, some material thing, otherwise our happiness is, we'll be completely miserable and our happiness will be crushed. Okay, so that for the Stoics, there's an implicit value judgment there, which is mistaken, right? It's a mistaken belief, right? We mistakenly believe that we have to have a particular sort of material thing in order to possess happiness, right? What we need to do is to learn to see that judgment as false and give our assent only to impressions that tell us the right thing. We don't need wealth in order to be happy. We don't need fame in order to be happy, right? Those things are indifference. All that we need is to know that we're living and acting well, right? So acting well and doing the right thing, preserving ourselves by preserving and acting according to our rational nature is what will make us happy. Okay. Before I get onto cognitive behavioral therapy, a couple of quotes from Marcus Aurelius. So the three parts of the three disciplines of Epictetus: erase your representation, your sort of fantasia, that's the discipline of judgment. Check your impulse to action, that's the discipline of action. Extinguish your desire, that's the discipline of desire. Keep your directing principle, that's your sort of soul, your main power. Keep your directing principle, your hegemonicon, within your power, right? So allow the directing principle to make good choices by disciplining desire and making sure you're only giving assent to things that you should give assent to and that are not mistaken beliefs about things. So the Stoic philosophical life depends on our ability to master our inner discourse. And the most famous sort of quote here that really expresses this is that and this comes from Epictetus, in fact, it's not things that trouble us, but our judgments about things, right? And that's the center of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's not things that trouble us, it's our judgments about things, right? The power to have the right judgments is up to us, right? That's in our power. So whether we're troubled or whether we're happy is in our power, and therefore it's up to us. So what Marcus is doing in the meditations, like I said, is to transform that inner discourse. He's doing these spiritual exercises, he's sort of notating and giving himself reminders as a way of sort of meditating on the Stoic dogmas and making them come alive in the current moment. So this is the kind, if you want to live like a Stoic, you've got to do something like this. You've got to keep a journal. You've got to sort of journal, every day and sort of talk about how you're experiencing things and sort of motivate and give yourself reminders of what's important and what's of value, and sort of it's a sort of practice of self-making. And it's sort of, that sort of idea of philosophy as a way of life that I mentioned Pierre Hadot talks about, that is really embedded in Marcus Aurelius's discourse. Okay, let me say a few words on the cognitive behavioral and rational emotive therapies, which have been, since the middle of the 20th century, these approaches started to develop in psychology, and really sort of came away from old Freudian approaches and sort of older approaches, and really focused on individuals' beliefs and individuals' rationality. And one thing that these theories do is they sort of take us as rational beings who can sort of work on our beliefs, and they give whoever's sort of whoever's doing the therapy the potential to sort of think rationally about beliefs, about why you hold them, about how you ground them, about how important they are to you. And all of this is sort of embodying this Stoic idea that we should only care about what's up to us, right? That the things that matter to us are up to us. It's not things that trouble us, it's our judgments about things. And they're trying to change our judgments about things. So the theory assumes that maladaptive behaviors and disturbed moods or emotions are the result of inappropriate or rational thinking patterns. Some people call them automatic thoughts. So this is something that the Stoics really understood, that we don't understand so well nowadays. I don't think that these thoughts and emotion are very closely related, right? They're not opposite things. Emotions, there's a kind of rationality to our emotions. Emotions want to be heard. They want to be recognized. So there's emotions and thoughts always go together. They're not separate things. And sort of learning that and learning how that works, I think, is something that Stoics can really help us with today. So therapy can consist of testing assumptions we make, identifying our usual unquestioned thoughts and how they're distorted and unhelpful and unrealistic and so on. And so it's directly sort of challenging our thoughts and our feelings about a subject matter and making them more easy to change. So it is sort of directly challenging, and often some of the techniques in cognitive behavioral therapy involve you actually envisaging something you're really anxious about, something you're really nervous about, and sort of really trying to imagine that moment really vividly and live in that moment. And part of it is sort of getting used to that emotion and seeing that it's changing our beliefs about that emotion, right? And seeing that it's not as scary as we thought. We thought it was so scary, and we had this emotion that if this happened, it would be the end of the world, and oh no, it would be so bad. But once you sort of see it and you visualize it and you sort of experience it, you change your beliefs, right? Your belief can change, and you say, well, it's not as scary as I thought. I can live with that, right? It's not great, but it's okay. I can accept that. Right. So that's really the logic of the therapy, that you're changing, you're sitting with your emotions and your beliefs, and you're challenging them, and in the process you're able to change the beliefs that you have about your feelings. And often the ways our beliefs go wrong are through things like overgeneralization, right? That's very common. We're sort of like, oh yeah, this, having a bad morning, so everything is terrible, right? Everything is totally terrible. And again, that's, overgeneralization. It's one of the ways we get into these sort of bad loops. And so it's, our brains and our rational brains are sort of leading us astray, right? They're being rational. They're trying to sort of jump to conclusions. They're trying to sort of find connections, but they're not helping us. It's like they're working on overtime trying to make these connections, but everything they're doing is sort of leading us astray, leading us into sort of bad and harmful beliefs rather than good ones. So we need to sort of, the task is to work on those beliefs to help us to improve, to have better beliefs that will better enable us to live. So that's really the basis of this sort of emotional therapy. So, sort of briefly, the cognitive restructuring, we identify the automatic thoughts, the cognitive distortions that go with them, and then we can sort of rationally dispute them. I mean, why do you believe everything's bad just because, you're having a bad morning? That's crazy, right? Things might, doesn't mean everything's bad. Things are going to be okay later on. Tomorrow's a new day. Right, so that's the sort of rational disputation, the sort of rational taking up of these irrational beliefs. And so you can do that with self-evaluated thoughts about the evaluations of others, evaluative thoughts about other people, the sort of strong reactions we have. And again, they're sort of, if they're too intense, if they're too strong, we can sort of take issue with them and say, well, we don't have to love that person, but it's not that it's completely impossible for us to be here and interact with them, right? So it's sort of, again, taking us down to a level where things are manageable is an important part of what CBT does. So this may or may not be helpful, but the decision-making algorithm, is it under my control? So if it's not something you can affect, if it doesn't matter, if it's just, the universe is coming to an end, there's nothing you can do. It's not up up to you. There's nothing you can do about it. So it's not within your control. It's not part of your decision making, right? So if it is under your control, then yes. If it concerns virtue, then yes. If no, then it's indifferent, and it doesn't matter so much. But if yes, we can use it to sort of extend our rational nature and to exercise our rational virtue, and to do the right thing. Okay, finally, I'll leave you with the Stoic cheat sheet, which is, sorry, it's not mine. I stole it online, but there's a number of sort of things with beliefs, strategies, and goals. Everything is temporary. If you are unhappy, it is your fault. I mean, that's quite a strong statement, but there's definitely that sort of aspect to this, that we are in control of how we feel. We are in control of our emotions, and therefore what we feel is up to us. So very important that we are social beings with a social duty. We live in community. Fatalism, not in the sense that, oh my God, everything is terrible, but in the sense that the universe is determined, right? There's not a lot we can do to affect things on the sort of cosmic level. Things are going to happen as they are. Those things are not up to us. All right. We just have the power to affect the things that are up to us and to help people that we can help. So not hedonism, not fame, and philosophy must be lived. It must be taken up and lived, and is not something just for the study. I'll skip over the other things, but you can look in your own time. I'll happy to make the presentation available for everybody if so desired, and also happy if anybody has any questions, if we have time.
We have
right now.
Here, you were so fascinating. I was taking notes as fast as you were saying it.
Nice,
and,
good.
I kept thinking, if people were like this, it would be wonderful that you could. Stoicism, and I always thought of the people who are Stoic, I didn't feel that they were unfeeling. I felt that they were feeling, but that they were able to control their feelings. So obviously, that was when you saw people who would be suffering and they were Stoic about it and didn't complain. That's how I looked at it. But the whole history of it was fascinating. And I just want to ask you one question, if you don't mind. How does it play in religion? It's the same as the religious beliefs, isn't it, to a degree? So, to do good, to work, to take care of others, isn't that part of the religious thinking as well as a philosophy?
I guess you could say that in this sort of, and a lot of the, it's interesting. A lot of this was influenced by Plato and Aristotle, and you could see that influence in the idea that virtue is the most important thing. And of course that ends up in Christianity as well. And, regardless of how well that's observed, right, that sort of idea is central to Christianity, that only living virtuous, which means, has its own sort of sense of living according to Christ in the Christian tradition. But yeah, there are definitely sort of a lot of connections there, with this idea of that living the right way just means doing the right thing, and that's the only thing that matters, and wealth, fame, and all these other things don't matter. And yeah, that's the ancient core of Christianity, I guess. I also like that it's I see a lot of comparisons with Eastern philosophy as well that I find really interesting as well. Whether the Buddhist tradition as well, and the Hindu tradition, and the sort of connections there which are similar to Buddhism, I think. And I find just the idea that it's a practice of self-discipline as much as anything else, and that philosophy is a practical thing. It's about living life. For the Buddhist, it's learning to avoid to discipline our cravings, right? And that's very similar to the sort of Stoic idea that we only focus on things that are up to us. It's only things we can change, or the things that we worry about. So I'm very, I'm fascinated by this idea that there's this ancient wisdom in Stoicism and Buddhism, which is very similar in these. And what I also find fascinating is how, I think you were mentioning this, Phil, is how useful they are today. Our psychology hasn't changed, and obviously in 3,000 years we are the same. We're the same beings, right? And I find this ancient wisdom is very helpful for thinking through these problems that we always carry with us that don't go away, and we need this ancient wisdom to help us think through these things.
Roger, that was really fascinating. This is Laura. Hi.
Hi, Laura.
That was great. I was also scribbling notes the whole time. But what you were just saying, it does seem very useful no matter what era we're in. And I was just wondering if you thought there could be a kind of renaissance of Stoicism, in the contemporary time, or is it happening already with it's being used in like cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that?
Yeah, that's right. It would. I mean, it is. Certainly the last 20 years or so in philosophy, there's a sort of Stoicism conference that goes on every year now. It's online. It's the Stoicon. If you want to look it up, it's
okay.
And that's popular, and a lot of people present there, and yeah, but I think like you said, it's a lot of this is in psychology now, and those sort of techniques about how to sort of deal with these sort of emotional problems, and the sort of things that people do sort of CBT and those techniques for these sort of sort of really sort of learning to sort of control your emotions, or also sort of relate better to your emotions, to understand them, and to not to have such sort of strong negative reactions. What I'd like to see, as my interest in this as a philosopher, I sort of love the whole tradition, and I think, there's certainly the piece that psychology does, which is sort of fixing behavioral problems, but the piece that we need to get more prominence, I think, is is sort of this broader sort of idea in Stoicism of the broader idea of living well, right? That doesn't come across with the psychology piece, because that's all just fixing. I'm in a rut and I've got to fix it, so I'll go see a therapist, right? But there's also the case of when we're just living averagely and we're not in a rut, but we want to live well, right? And so it's that whole sort of life philosophy, the encompassing life philosophy that Stoicism brings. And I find it interesting that it sort of flourished at a time when, it was the Hellenistic age, and it was after, the Greek, the sort of Athenian democracy had collapsed by this point, and there was no there was no sort of democracy anymore, and it was it was a different world. And Stoicism is almost like it flourishes when there's when it's like you need to sort of fall back on your own devices in order to find happiness, right? You can't depend on the world outside being sane in order to be happy, so you have to sort of find a way that comes from within and sort of recreate that sort of that whole sort of way of living from within, because you can't find it out there. Yeah, I do find that comparison quite compelling today, that this makes Stoicism very very relevant to what we do. Yeah.
You have so much to offer. Will you come back in the spring?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So much from you. What you condense is amazing, what you did in an hour. And I wish we could go on, but I know that, everyone, they'll say we've stretched out our time. So I appreciate you. You have so much to say. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Phyllis. It was a pleasure.
I hope everyone will understand. You just have to take care and make others happy, and control yourself when you can't control anything else. Is that it?
That's in a nutshell. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Stay weak, be safe, be healthy, be happy, and do for others. Okay.
Yep.
Take care.
Okay.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Roger. And
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
take care now. Be safe. Be
You
safe.
too.